Hello and welcome to our Youth Research Dialogue today. This episode is part of our regular online series dealing and discussing evidence-based youth research findings from the RAY network and beyond. Before we dive into today's episode, some introductory words. My name is Carmen Teubel-Kiviniemi. I'm the coordinator and manager of the European Youth Research Network RAY, which is hosted by the Finnish National Agency for Education. The RAY network itself is involving currently 36 partners in 34 countries, including national agencies responsible for the European youth programs and national researchers. Today our episode is Youth Work in Motion, Evolving Competences, and we will present fresh findings from our RAY research project on competence development for youth work through trainings in the European youth programs. We call it RAY Comp, that's the abbreviation we use, and we have also good news for you. We just published the key findings today, so if you want to dive deeper into the document, then please check out our website and our social media channels. Our discussion today will address the youth workers' perspectives and their needs in a changing world and also in a changing youth field. We will discuss what kind of evolving competences are crucial for them in order to be able to support young people in the next years, but also the next decades. And this includes meaningful values and security as well. We will also talk about what structural aspects needs to be addressed in non-formal, but also in education, in more formal educational settings, and how the European youth programs and training activities can contribute to that and to capacity building as well. And we will ask what trends can be determined and how might holistic and strategic approaches support them. Ashley Pitschmann from our RAY transnational research team will walk you through our findings from the RAY Comp research project. She is working for Youth Policy Lab, a small research agency and think tank in the youth sector. And her work with RAY have focused on a various number of research projects, including the impact of the corona pandemic on youth work in Europe, the monitoring of effects and outcomes of the European youth programs on participants and leaders, as well as the development and the capacity building with and through the European youth programs. Very happy to have you today with us. Our guest speaker is Maria-Carmen Pantea, or short Mia, from the Babeș-Bolyai University. A very warm welcome to you. She is a professor of sociology and a social worker in Romania. She is also a member of the advisory group of the Pool of European Youth Researchers. This is coordinated by the Youth Partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe. Her research interests include career studies, youth work, and civil society, and she has been involved in the youth work community since 2008 in various roles. We are very happy that you are with us today. Our team is Lena Surpa, our moderator, and Tomoga Moric, our digital facilitator. And with that, I wish you an inspiring dialogue. And now to you, Lena.
Thank you, Carmen, and welcome from my part as well to this dialogue. My name is Lena Surpa, and I will be your moderator today. As Carmen said, we will focus today on youth workers' competencies and perspectives and needs on their competencies, development, and strengthening their competencies in a changing world, comprising both non-formal, informal, and formal education, all of them very important in the field of youth work. Today, we will dive into the conclusions of a very interesting study by the RAY network, as Carmen said. At the core in the profession of youth work is not only understanding and supporting the lives of young people here and now, but also anticipating the future and strengthening young people's confidence in the future. This is perhaps more important than ever in our world full of simultaneous crises and uncertainties. In Finland, where I live, young people's faith in the future has collapsed according to our youth barometer published recently. What does all this mean for the training and competence needs of youth workers? The related the RACOMP report raises very important recommendations and issues in this respect as well. For example, maintaining flexibility, developing crisis management competencies, recognizing youth work as a value-based and as a holistic profession, to mention a few. Ashley from the transnational research team will give an input and introduces first findings of the COMP study. Ashley's insights will be commented by Mia, who has conducted diverse sociological research projects and processes on young people. I really look forward to Ashley's reflections and dialogue with Mia. Before we dive into the discussion, I would like to remind the audience about the great possibility to join the dialogue. In that sense, this is a unique dialogue. We invite you to ask questions either on the Facebook or YouTube chats or via Slido. Simply go to slido.com and type in the code, which is now displayed on the screen. And now, Ashley, it's your floor. Please, welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Ashley Pitschmann from the Transnational Research Team, and I will be talking about the findings from the RACOMP project within the context of youth work in motion, evolving competencies. Next slide, please. So I thought it'd be helpful to have a brief introduction to the RACOMP project and how it was structured and what we aimed to uncover. We have the key research questions: how do training providers design their offers? How do trainers implement training activities? And what training needs do youth workers identify? And we sought to answer this through 71 cases across 4 perspectives, that is training providers, trainers, training participants, and youth workers and leaders. And this data gave us a very rich view into not only how training is delivered, but also how it shapes youth workers' professional developments over time. Next slide, please. So the first question is, of course, what competences are needed? This table I have here presents a very non-exhaustive overview of the core competence areas, which I've grouped into knowledge and skills, relational and ethical practices, and organizational and strategic capacities. It's important to note here that this table reflects some of the core areas of training, such as pedagogy, communication, project management, empathy, that we have understood in the context of the training programs for a while. But there's also very specific new emerging demands, such as emphasis on mental health and well-being and trauma sensitivity, digital awareness and safety, crisis preparedness and resiliency building. And it's important to note that these newer needs are being driven by the very complex realities that youth workers are facing when supporting young people nowadays. We have the post-pandemic recovery, whereas political polarization, rising misinformation, disinformation, the rise of AI, so climate change, so many things happening in real life that needs competencies for youth workers to support young people. But we've seen from the research so far in COMP that there's a mismatch between the training supply and the actual demand, where these new emerging competencies that are necessary, such as sustainability and even digital youth work, becoming increasingly important, but are remaining underrepresented in the available trainings. Next slide, please. But we can say that the European Youth Program's trainings are widely recognized as effective tools for competence development. 96.4% of participants in youth worker mobility, TCA, and networking activities reported that the trainings improved their youth work. And some things that are working well within the training field. We have these long-term training activities that are considered to be especially valuable as they offer depth and continuity, and many youth workers describe them as transformative experiences. The European training strategy competence models are also a standout in the training field. Our research has shown that they're particularly useful for more experienced youth workers because they already have a sense of their development needs and how to navigate self-directed learning. And finally, peer learning and reflection are consistently appreciated by youth workers. They value the opportunity to connect with others in the field, exchange experiences, and build a community. And we've seen in the research that these relational elements are often as impactful as the content of the trainings themselves. And of course, when we talk about what's working well, we need to discuss what needs to be improved or the challenges. Next slide, please. So the core challenge that we saw in a lot of the research is the fragmented learning paths and the lack of guided progression, where many youth workers described trainings as feeling often disconnected and isolated. We have one participant from our research who said each training contributes to the mosaic of skills, conveying a sense that they're creating a picture from the tiny pieces that they get through the trainings. Many youth workers are relying on trial and error and peer learning to sort of understand what their professional development plans may be. And while frameworks like the ETS are very useful, as I said, especially for the experienced practitioners, many lesser experienced youth workers may lack the mentoring and structured support to make use of these frameworks over time. The report also shows an imbalance in training levels, where the entry-level training is widely available and of course still very necessary. There is this undersupply of advanced or specialized opportunities, especially for youth workers with more experience. There's also in the research growing concerns we've seen from training quality, where many participants in our study said that there was a shift towards entertainment-focused formats that were aimed at visibility and higher participation numbers, risking undermining deeper learning and connections in these trainings. These trends were often said to stem from funding-related pressures by NGOs and national agencies to meet certain numbers that can undermine the overall learning. Finally, there seems to be persistent inequalities in access linked to language, geography, institutional support. That means that not all youth workers are able to benefit equally from the training programs. So with these challenges in mind, we think about what enables growth. Thank you. One of the most powerful findings that I can say from the research is that the trainings is not just about acquiring skills. It's about developing a sense of identity and purpose as a youth worker. Youth workers are in need of something called holistic lifelong learning perspective, one that connects their formal education, non-formal training, and informal experience into a continuous process of development. Mentoring and community is seen as very helpful. It's one of the most frequently named needs as a way to find space to reflect, receive guidance, and be part of a professional community that creates not only isolated trainings, but an overall feeling and network. And clear pathways and recognition mechanisms are very important for enabling growth. We saw in the research that countries with robust youth work frameworks had youth workers able to grow with more purpose, where they can apply what they've learned and see their competencies validated over time within their networks. Systemic alignment is also important. While the report calls for stronger alignment, we've recognized that the European level strategies do work within national frameworks and support structures, but there needs to be greater coherence to ensure that it leads to real-world applications. And then, of course, identity and growth. Professional development in youth work is also personal development. And supporting youth workers to grow means recognizing that the learning is tied inevitably to identity, values, and long-term commitments to the field. So, thank you. With that, I close with some 4 highlighted messages from the overall research. First, competence needs are contextual and evolving. The shift in our changing political, social, economic landscapes leads youth workers to understand different competencies. Second, youth work is a value-driven profession. It's not only about the technical tools which they learn, but also about how they identify themselves, that develop ethics and values and purpose within the youth work field. Third, training needs depth, continuity, and systemic support, where youth workers benefit most when learning is part of a longer developmental journey that's supported by mentoring and competency validation. And finally, the European programs have the greatest impact when they act as bridges that connect youth workers with systems, organizations, and communities across Europe that all can work within the local context. And with these general findings, I hope that we can have a nice discussion about where we can help youth work in motion. And I end my presentation here and look forward to hearing Mia's reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for your excellent presentation and also for this very, very important study, which somehow shows us how multi-professional, multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral youth work as a profession is, and this has to do with training as well. We have the possibility to go into some aspects of this important study, but I really recommend you or the audience to take a look at the conclusions of the report. So if we first take the aspect of mapping the key competencies of youth work in the world of polycrisis and uncertainties, actually, as the comp report begins in a very beautiful way, I think, by stating that being a youth worker is about empowering young people during one of the most critical phases of their lives. It is a profession of immense responsibility. And this is the quote. Taking into account the complex, unequal, and uncertain world young people are living in today, what do you see as the most important competencies that should be strengthened in the field of youth work, based on what you already said? But if you want to elaborate a little bit, what are the results you would like to raise from that perspective?
I think from the perspective, the research, and also my own perception is that, of course, the biggest competencies are developing young people, developing competencies that help young people navigate this complex world. So we have these new rising questions about digital security and safety and the rise of AI, which is going to, I think, revolutionize the way that humanity works with technology, the same way the internet changed the way we worked with technology when I was young. And I think so there needs to be an emphasis on how we can develop those competencies. There needs to be development of competencies related to resiliency and crisis preparedness, because as we saw in the pandemic, the youth sector struggled with a lot of the funding and the move to online platforms. But at the same time, youth work was essential for young people to help them get through the pandemic. So we need to develop competencies to understand that. We need to develop competencies in battling political polarization and threats to democracy in the European Union. And I think there's just so many competencies that, as I said in the report, we have a very long list. I think it's 3 or 4 pages of the competencies that have been identified. So those would be my top 3 for now.
Thank you. So the competencies is something which are here and now, but they are very future-oriented as well. So that is something we need for your youth workers. They must somehow foresee the future all the time, and that's their core competence somehow. How do you, Mia, how would you like to comment on this, what Ashley just said, or presentation on the opportunities and challenges in supporting young people's empowerment in an uncertain world?
Thank you, Lena. Thank you. I think that often when we speak about youth empowerment, resilience comes into focus. And although resilience has become a popular, even fashionable idea, I think it is not without its problems. And one refers to the difference between resilience and activism. And I think the issue is that resilience does not question the status quo. It generally conveys the idea of supporting young people to survive challenges, to grow, to learn from them. It places the responsibility for change within persons, indeed supported by youth workers, but it definitely has a focus on the performance of positivity. And it does not necessarily address the conditions that produce adversity. And this is the problem, I think. Resilience focuses on how the person can change in the face of adversity rather than on what we can collectively do to change the adversity itself. Meanwhile, young people are not simply adapting. They are leading bold social, political, environmental movements, and they do demonstrate a willingness to change the status quo. And I think that supporting young people as they move from coping with challenges to confronting and reshaping them, I think it's a strong test for youth work, because it requires it to revisit the mission and the commitment for social change. And to consider willingness to take political risks, particularly in context where the space for civil society is shrinking and where youth work occupation depends on state funding, for instance. And a second challenge, I think, is engaging with the young people who are searching for a voice, but are attracted to neo-fascist or extremist movements. I think that these manifestations are not youth work or empowerment in a normative policy or ethical sense, but still they are organized by and for young people. They are offering a sense of purpose, belonging, identity. And many of these young people come from small towns, from the so-called geographic content, with a very poor access to services, employment, and youth work. So to me, there is a risk that youth work ends up preaching to the converted unless it finds ways to engage with these hard-to-reach groups. And how to do so? I think it may require a new set of culturally competent approaches that are based on ethnographic research into these emerging groups, which are firmly grounded in ethics, because everybody deserves ethically minded research and interventions and youth work as well. So that would be my answer for a moment.
Thank you, Mia. Very interesting answer. And before I give the floor to Ashley, I remind the audience that you have the great opportunity to participate in the discussion by asking the questions or just send the reflections. So we are very pleased of having your feedback as well. I think your distinction between core competence as strengthening the resilience and promoting activism of young people is very interesting one, and perhaps the question is whether young people are seen as a subject or object for social change in a changing world. Very interesting. Ashley, would you like to comment on that, or shall we go forward?
I think that's a very good point that Mia brings up, is this idea of young people being simultaneously acted upon and actors as well. And I think that's something when we talk about developing competencies for youth workers, it's also about strengthening youth-led initiatives as well, and giving them the tools to give the tools to young people, because they are very active in a lot of these instances. And we do have young people, of course, being left out of the European youth programs. And of course, the question is, how do you engage with young people who have sort of fallen off of our radar? And I think it's also important when we're talking about youth worker competencies, is how do we get everyone back to the table and fight political polarization in a way that everyone can be heard and understood and dealt with in a compassionate way that allows us to progress as a society, of course. So I think that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. And if we think about the polarization of young people's rights for participation and the different resources, taking into account this right, that I think this is very important. I think it gets us back to the presentation of Ashley, focusing and emphasizing on the aspect of holistic youth work and how to promote in training, different kinds of training, the competence of young youth workers as being the profession of holism and value-driven youth work. And how would you, based on your research, how would you like to concretely comment on this? What are the concrete ways to further reinforce the idea of holism as a core competence of youth workers, and perhaps also the question of value-driven and value-based youth work in this world where we have values that collapse each other all the time, and it makes young people's living quite difficult?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'd start off with a quote from the report, because it really stuck out to me. One of our youth worker participants said, "A sense of belonging to the youth field. I felt it as a living part of my life. I even felt it as a professional distortion. I couldn't get away from it in the future." And I think for me, that quote really encapsulates how deeply youth work as a profession is for many youth workers. It's personal, it's professional. It's not just about how they relate, about how they know things or have tools, but how they can relate, reflect, and respond. Especially when we're working with young people, you have to build a relationship. You have to empathize with them to really have your work be effective. So holism in this context it's about connecting ethics. It's about connecting values, empathy, self-awareness, as well as all the competences and tools that you develop in these trainings in a way that youth workers can foster their own personal identities and help young people find themselves also in this increasingly chaotic world. And holism in the sense of trainings is about merging this professional and personal to the point where they are given knowledge that they can use in their everyday practice and in life. It's not just about a theory, but really what that means in a real practical saying. And I think that is when I'm discussing holism in competence development, that's really what it is. It's about understanding the individual in the community, but also the community in the individual.
Thank you, Ashley. Very wonderful reply to this very difficult question. Mia, would you like to somehow reflect on this question of or core competence of holism in contemporary world, perhaps taking into account also other professions and youth work? How to comment?
Indeed, I was really pleased to see that the report looks at youth work holistically, directly linking the professional journeys of youth workers with their personal biographies while integrating values, ethics, and so on. I think this is a crucial point, and I believe it's something we need to reflect across many occupations, because after all, we all bring our personal histories into the work we do, yet I think that in many fields, this connection is fractured, is overlooked, maybe treated as a residual, secondary, and it is a risk. It is a personal and political risk to make the connection. In fact, aside from humanities and artistic fields, I really can't think of many occupations that actively engage with the idea that personal biographies shape the work people do. But acknowledging this connection is not only important for those practicing youth work, but it also has a powerful impact on the young people they work with. Because when youth workers reflect on how their personal experience is influencing their practice, I think they create deeper and authentic relationships with the young people they support. And this also prompts youth workers to think about young people's own biographies and the relevance of learning and youth work in their lives. And also, Lena, I think that you might mention that this issue is relevant for the perspective of other sectors than youth work. So I think that schools could really benefit from this perspective, while they've started to see the importance of different forms of intelligence and the fact that education is embodied and shaped by gender, ethnicity, disability, so on. There is still more work to be done, and I think there is real potential for formal education to learn from youth work when it comes to embracing the link between personal and learning and acting in the world. Yes.
Thank you, Mia. All you have been saying somehow pictures youth work as a very rewarding but also hard profession. And we have an audience question for you. How can we avoid mental overload of youth workers? They cannot solve everything. Any ideas from the research? I think this is a very relevant question for us. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, indeed, I think that there have been many thematic priorities that delegated to youth work over the years. There has been an emphasis on everything from entrepreneurial learning to employability, skills development, critical thinking, learning about democratic processes, more recently the COVID topics, mental health, digital safety, environment, and I think this is a lot. And indeed, I think there are reasons for the question that there is an occupation facing a burden. And when these priorities are adding up, some need to be left out. And I think that from my conversation with the youth work community, I know that these shifting and overlapping priorities have led to very mixed levels of preparedness, burnout, and frankly, I think they also move the focus away from what many believe youth work mission, which is related to the civic space. And for a long time, there has been a focus on youth work aimed at employability, entrepreneurial skills. These are, of course, important, but now we are reconsidering almost with a sense of urgency the idea that young people need to value European belonging. They have a problem with the civic space, and we need to address these urgent issues. So I think that going back to the core mission and repositioning youth work in relation to civic participation is absolutely necessary. And I am happy to see that the recent European youth programs are placing a much stronger focus on civic engagement and democratic participation.
Yeah, thank you, Mia. I add one aspect from the audience question to you, Ashley. You have been discussing youth work profession also as a personal profession or a path of personal development and identity development. And the audience question is that if and when youth work is often seen as being done by a large part with the worker's personality, how does one balance that with professional capacities? So how professionalism and personalities are combined as a core competence?
Right, of course. When you think about the personal and the professional development, there's, of course, then you have these questions of the paradoxical standardization of what does that mean when you apply certain standards and quotas and expectations for a professional idea to understand that these competences need to be validated in the field with a very personal experience that a lot of youth workers bring into their work. And I think it's important to sort of embrace that paradox, to understand that the balance is, of course, in the details and understanding the principles of non-formal education, which is being flexible and diverse and empathetic. So in that sense, the core of who the youth worker is as a person is always sort of respected when you start then developing the professional pathways. And I think it's also what you say that there's, of course, just a lot happening in our society, a lot of change, a lot of different conflicts coming together. And I think when we talk about mental health and mental well-being as a competency, it's not just about developing competencies and tools for youth workers to support young people, but also themselves, to understand that it's also okay for them to take a step back and take breaks as is needed, to look after themselves as people. Because I think at the end of the day, when you're a youth worker, you're very, of course, concerned with society and people. And so you have to also remember that you are a part of society and you are also a person. And it's something I'm sure all of us could learn a little bit more in our professional lives.
Thank you. What was a wonderful reply from you. Perhaps we could go on toward structural challenges you have taken up already in your presentation, Ashley. And as you said, we really have pinpointed, or you have pinpointed, very many structural challenges that need to be particularly addressed in non-formal as well as formal education settings. What structural challenges would you like to still raise up, and perhaps also in the field of international youth work? We have one audience question: what is the European dimension in youth work to be strengthened? So if you can reply with regard to that as well. And then Mia after that.
I think for me, the biggest standout is, of course, this fragmentation of the training landscapes. And I think as the youth workers are developing their competencies and they're creating this mosaic of their professional development pathways, it has an impact on the national level and the international level, because the international level is there to be a bridge between the European and the national and the local. But if there aren't structured pathways in a larger sense that can then be tied back to the national and the local, then it's always going to be sort of a half success, half fail. If I can put it that way. And I think also the structural pressures, particularly at the European level that we're seeing, is a very big challenge, where many of the participants in our interviews and focus groups said that this trend towards high visibility, high participant level at the expense of deeper learning and deeper connections is something that will inevitably do a disservice to the field, because it divides attention and doesn't really allow youth workers to dive deeply into topics that are important at the international level when we're talking about building civic responsibility and faith in EU institutions and understanding democracy. Of course, if you can only do those very, very surface level, then we're not doing a service to young people in the end. So I think those would be the two big ones for me.
Thank
So-
you.
Mhm.
And Mia, how would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Thank you. I totally agree with Ashley. I think that in regards to the fragmentation and the market-driven logic focused on performance indicators, I think that whilst the young people need meaningful engagement, long-term, authentic social relationships and bonds, indeed, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured really matters. So, but to add to Ashley, I would say that in my understanding, ideally, the ultimate scope of the European youth programs is to generate structures and the professional cultures able to sustain themselves, to be sustainable. And I'm not thinking about economic sustainability, but some sort of institutional endurance. And one challenge is when such processes are project-driven, exclusively based on EU funding and intermittent. Especially in countries without a strong youth work tradition, there is a risk and has been a historical risk for youth work to be used as a political tool for control, or youth work is rather discredited. I think it's hard to create a base for youth workers' capacity building outside the fragmented training provisions that Ashley mentioned. So here I see a major dilemma: how to make sure the scaffolding needed for youth work is of quality, continuous, and sustainable, and that member states do their share. Important for the countries that don't have a strong youth work tradition.
Thank you, Mia. I think you have touched upon very important things, and we see that the audience are become more active as well. And there are a couple of reflections, and I think I could read them for everybody. Thank you for sharing. I have a brief reflection from my side. These days, as has been mentioned, youth workers are expected to possess a wide range of skills and competencies across many fields and areas. This often results in professionals feeling a heavy burden of responsibility on their shoulders, responsibilities that should perhaps be more collective than individual. Furthermore, we could imagine more inclusion and better prepared educational systems, not always depending on the teaching. I think you somehow have touched upon that, but would you like to comment on this audience reflection? On this responsibility, which should be more collective than personal. I think it's an important one.
Yeah, I think that fixing one person after another is not going to bring us to a better society. So we need a collective commitment for a change that is larger than us. And I think that youth work can be part of that solution. And still, I think it's important for youth work to maintain certain professional boundaries, in the sense that whenever there is a problem in Paradise, youth work is called to do something about that. So, and this is at the expense of what youth work as a community and young people really feel as being important. And having a moment of reflection of what kind of societies we aim at and where youth work is and what role it can play, I think would be really helpful for the community, prevent burnout, and prevent very scattered and local and emergency-focused interventions, rather than deep and meaningful and processes that are based on the values that have been historically at the core of youth work.
Yeah, thank you. Ashley, would you like to add something?
I feel like it actually relates a lot to the discussions that were being had in the pandemic, in the lockdown, where youth workers and young people themselves felt very much that they were called to fill a void that somehow was left in civil society, to support people and maintain community and to be there for one another. And I think we're seeing now a reflection on how we can build, as I said, resiliency, but in the sense of how are we creating a system that works together in this wholeness to support youth workers and young people so that they don't have to feel that they're burdened with this just on their own. It's also a change that needs to happen within the formal education, where we need to bring back a sort of sense of community, a lot of that, where we're learning and we're educating our young people because we want to create a society where we respect each other and have empathy for each other. So I think it's always, of course, tied together, and the lessons that we're learning from the pandemic are going to be lessons that we will have to continue to address moving forward in youth work competencies and youth work.
Yeah, that's true. Good way of putting it. Yeah, thanks. We have a comment from Slido. Interestingly, the Council of Europe is also exploring how to balance professionalization of youth work versus not formalizing it too much. Perhaps this could be a bridge to my next last question on what are the best or most successful practices of training activities in the European Youth Programme when looking at how they contribute to the current capacity needs and building of youth workers. Would you like to say something concrete from that perspective, Ashley, based on your research?
I think from the research, what was really quite interesting was this interest in the long-term training activities. We, in the key findings, we titled it high effort but high reward. And I think when we're talking about training specifically for youth workers, it should be more of this immersive sort of experience where they're allowed to build communities and make connections while also learning very deeply about the contents of the training that fits into their own professional journey. And I think with that comes also this understanding of the peer learning and the reflections and mentorship that many of the youth workers said was really important for their own training experience and training impacts. And so when we're building capacity, we shouldn't forget that the community is so important for youth workers. We can learn from each other best practices, things that didn't work within our context, and also how to navigate difficult situations. And then, of course, this fostering of the professional and personal and maintaining balance and flexibility is, I think, important. We could figure out ways of standardizing the profession that don't sacrifice the learner-centeredness. That is a very key point of non-formal education. We can have it so that trainers and training providers have the capacity and power to adjust to what's needed within that specific group itself. So I think there are ways there. They're subtle and they're small, but they make big impacts.
Yeah, thank you. I think you raise very important issues also with respect of our world, which is increasingly individualistic from the perspective of young people, but also from the perspective of youth work and youth work as a profession. I think there is a huge focus on individualization of everything, and I think it's important to somehow fight against that. And youth profession is in the forefront of doing this kind of fight as well. Mia, would you like to comment on this?
I think that whether and to what extent youth work should be professionalized has been a debatable topic for quite a while. And I think it's very country specific. In some parts, there is already the case that youth work is a recognized occupation or profession. In some countries, there is a culture of volunteering and there is less pressure or incentive to formalize the role with professional standards or regulations. But in other countries, there is a need for occupational standards, for structures to promote youth work, and also systems for training, for educating and employing youth workers. But such structures need to enable professional autonomy and freedom. And here I think we have an issue because usually when states are directly involved in youth work, there are political strings attached, and this is not something that we would cherish. So I have long been thinking about the dilemma and imagined potentially independent bodies of accreditation and funding that use public budgets alongside other sources, yet make sure organizations and youth workers involved are free to engage in democratic processes, in critical thinking and advocacy. We do have some examples of good practice in Europe where such processes are indeed managed by entities that are independent in terms of their operations and decision making, with proper safeguards in place to protect organizations from the fear of retaliation, which is actually something that is going on in many parts of Europe. But indeed, many countries need stronger involvement from those who shape European youth policy and programs. And I think this is where the question from the chat was heading at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. And now we go to the end. And my last question is, what is your key message that you would like to deliver to youth policy decision makers based on all what we have been discussing in 40 seconds, each of you, or 1 minute? Ashley, please.
Yeah, sorry. My key message is, of course, we need to recognize and strengthen the youth worker competency development to build into more systemic structures that don't leave isolated initiatives, but are part of a community building. And we should also remember that when we're building these competencies in youth workers and trainings, that the idea is not only to strengthen the sector, but it's also about building more resilient, democratic, and inclusive societies. So it needs to come together as one part of a moving machine.
I have been involved in researching graduates' careers, and from my engagement with this field, I tend to believe that once youth work is seen as a respected and sustainable career choice, young people will join. And those choosing the occupation will be competent, eager to learn, and so on. I think a key message for decision makers would be that some countries need structures for building or maintaining youth work in a stronger way than others. So there is a lot of variance between countries, and the need for EU support is stronger in the countries without a consolidated tradition in recognizing youth work as an occupation, ideally profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Mia, for this wonderful discussion. And now, unfortunately, we must end this, but thank you for you, and thank you also for the audience for joining our second Youth Research Dialogue in 2025.
Thank you for...
Yes, and as Lena said, thank you for joining, and the stream will be available afterwards. So if you want to rewatch it or if you want to share it with your colleagues, you're more than welcome to do it.
Yes, and thank you so much from my side to Margot, Lena, and Ashley, and Mia. Sorry, Mia, we cut you off. I think you wanted to thank for being here, so it was really an interesting discussion. We continue with our Youth Research Dialogue, so the next one is on the 18th of June. So as always, check our website, our social media channels, and you will find out more what the next topic and the next research findings we will talk about. So thanks so much, and see you soon, and take care.